Stories. They're a very important part of human nature. Even children use stories to entertain, educate, and control each other. But in this modern age of instant feedback entertainment, are stories still important? Hi, I'm Gareth, the creator of No Stone Unturned and author of No Stone Unturned, The Peculiar Case of the Missing Acorn. And today I'm going to tell you why storytelling is still important. If you enjoy yourself while you're here and learn something along the way, then feel free to click the subscribe button and the dreaded bell. But without further ado, here's 6 reasons why storytelling is still important today. Number 1. Communication. We use stories in order to connect with our fellow humans. We give them a happy story and they think happy thoughts. Isn't that weird? This is also a great way for us to share an experience. For instance, lots of people who are here experiencing the exact same thing and the exact same thoughts. We, from that, feel a connection to these people, even if the real connection was being made here. It can also help us solve problems. For instance, a story can explain how to do something. Gonna draw a little banging a nail into a hammer, or hammer into a nail rather. And it can help the youngest among us learn about the world. Generally, the stories that we tell for kids are about the morals of teaching them a good life, and because of these stories, they're allowed to develop naturally. Let's move on to number 2. On the topic of teaching, number 2 is education. Hidden inside stories, we can put a whole bunch of information that we wanted the audience to learn originally. You could think of something as simple as, this is a terrible drawing, as simple as a little fairy flying in the sky. Fairy tales is where I was going with this. Fairy tales or cautionary tales are used to explain to kids the dangers of certain things. Like for instance, Little Red Riding Hood, who had a basket of food. Like Little Red Riding Hood, who had a basket of food and didn't want to give it to the hungry. Let's see if I can draw a wolf. Wolf. Rah. It looks like a messed up Sonic. Little Red Riding Hood, the moral of this story is simple: don't talk to strangers, and that monsters can often wear the face of people we love the most. But there's way more educational stories out there. For instance, parables, a famous religious story where the objective is in fact to teach morals to the listener. And I say listener because most of these stories were done through oral tradition. We can also see plenty of stories about historical figures or biopics, if we're going to go for the cinema term. These are stories where the events either did happen or they're a more dramatized version of real events. And they're intended in a way to teach people the history of how these great figures became great. But we don't just have to teach through stories, we can teach with them as well. For instance, there was an experiment done in my school where you'd have to learn 10 different words, and then in 10 minutes you would remember all of them if you could, and you would write them all down. Let's do an example of that right now. We'll do 10 items. I'm gonna do something easy to draw because I can't draw very well. We'll do an apple. That looks like an apple, right? Wait, here we go. The bite taken out. Perfect. Now I can get sued. We have a pencil. We have a glass of milk. We have an acorn, a house, a boat, a car. I'm killing it with the drawings. And let's say for the last one, we have a desk lamp that is not owned by any famous animation studios. So here we have 8 images, and I want you to look at them for a moment and then boom. They're gone. What were they? I actually can't remember, but I think I can. So, the way that I can remember this better is something that you can do as well using a story technique. For instance, the apple was an artist and used a pencil. They became thirsty and needed a glass of milk. After their thirst was quenched, they were hungry and began eating an acorn. And they then left home to go on a journey over boat and land. What was the last one? Over boat and land to meet their famous friend, the Pixar lamp. Now at each point I have added a connector between these that allows me to remember them as a sequence of images instead of just one idea or 8 separate ideas. I am remembering one story where the apple who was writing took a glass of milk and an acorn, left home on boat and car, and met the Pixar lamp. Suddenly, I have a 1-sentence thing that I can remember, which allows me to hit every point along these 8 steps. So we can use stories as a format for improving our memory. At least improving our memory recall, something that's very useful for things like exams if you're in school. I almost didn't remember them there. That was embarrassing. A tip for this is to think of the story before you rub off all the images. So number 3, we talked about it a bit during the education section, but it is history and culture. Specifically, it is cultural preservation. This can be the idea that we are but a speck of this infinite cosmos we call the timeline. And for instance, if the whole of history was placed on a calendar, human history would only be the last second of December 31st. Or how many something have November and December? I don't know the song. Basically, we are all destined to perish, and that's okay. It's not a bad thing that we are all gonna die. But what we can do is leave behind evidence of our existence. We may not be able to leave behind much, at least not much that will leave us to an individual memory, but we can be remembered for the time period we were. For instance, when we go back in time and look at the Romans or the Celts and other famous time periods, there's plenty of evidence left through the creators of that time. There's not a lot left by the people who were, you know, therapists. No, I can't say that, it's insulting to therapists. But you get my point. With stories, we are allowed to leave something behind, and that is our purpose as storytellers. We may believe that it is to gain the love and attention of those around us, but what we will be remembered for in major parts is the cultural preservation that we put in our work. For instance, with my work in No Stone Unturned, a major part of it is about showing what Britain is like right now through the subtext of the story. That is to make it in a way a piece that could be timeless because it represents that time. So in summary, we are a part of history whether we want to be or not, and we may as well add to it. Number 4. Number 4 is exactly what I got into writing for, is the emotional release. Writers famously don't get that many friends in life, and they famously aren't very good at communicating their feelings outside of the written word. This is largely because they find themselves unable to find emotional release through anything other than their creative output. I, for one, massively struggle to release my emotions, and I find stories are a great way of allowing me to. This isn't all about creating sadness or crying. This can be funny, this can be laughter, but stories allow people to let go of their inhibitions around them, let go of judgment, and instead focus their judgment onto a fictional character that they can engage with. A recent example for me is, this is a terrible drawing. What does he look like? But Spider-Man. It's a terrible drawing of Spider-Man. Recently, in No Way Home, when Andrew Garfield catches Zendaya, and anybody who's seen Amazing Spider-Man knows the moment that he is recreating with the jump and the fall, and the catch being the difference in his previous example of it. The second I saw that in the cinema, I just started crying. And I don't cry a lot. I really don't cry a lot. I've only been made to cry by a few movies. King Kong, when I was a kid. Lord of the Flies, when they kill Piggy. Spoilers, by the way. And No Way Home. And Hatchie, A Dog's Tale. Those are the 4 that I think have made me cry. And it's simply because this emotional release was so strong in the moment. There was so much building up to this. I loved it a lot. So with stories, we can allow the emotionally stunted weirdos of the world to feel a connection to something. And as an emotionally stunted weirdo, I thank anybody who does this. Number 5 is a little bit of a creepy one. Influence and persuasion. And it's important to note that this can be done for good, but mostly bad. Examples of this can be propaganda, famously during wartime, but also modern propaganda, the news, you know. These are all stories that are designed to make you either angry, fearful, but also to influence your political beliefs. For instance, do a small experiment. The next time someone brings something up that is political, they will likely be telling a story about a real life situation instead of outright saying their political beliefs. What you can do is listen out for what they're saying and check, what does this story give me? As the audience, what am I meant to be receiving right now? This story about this political group doing a bad thing, Obviously, I'm now meant to be on the other side. People don't realize that they do this themselves, but they are just as guilty as the big news networks. But as I say, we can use it for good. For instance, we can impart morals to children. We can say that lying is the wrong thing to do, that being honest and open with each other is the best way of sharing a community. We can warn of the dangers of loneliness. We can warn of the dangers of drug addiction. We can do a lot with stories that can influence people in a great way. We can teach hard work. We can inspire people to try and do new things in life, to try and learn more. These are all great things that add to the world, and it wouldn't be possible without the stories that inspired it. And with that, we move on to the last section, probably the most obvious one of the lot. Entertainment. Perhaps the most fun reason of all to tell a story is to see the reactions of the people you tell the story to. I know that when I tell a story in my own life, generally speaking, I am trying to frame the truth in a way that will give people a satisfying story, a satisfying feeling of entertainment, a laugh or two, maybe an emotional release moment, which some would argue is to distract us from death. This is a cheery episode. Yes, we can be distracted from death, we can be distracted from the tough things in life that make us angry or that make us sad. We can distract us from things like death, things that make us angry, things that make us sad, general anxiety in our own lives. These distractions allow us to quiet our internal noise because of the external noise. A great point about this is if you struggle to sleep, then having a noise machine on can help you, because what you're really struggling to do is turn your brain's inner voice off. And a great way of doing that is to give us something to focus on. Why do a lot of people fall asleep in the movies like instantly? It's because they finally can let their own brain go and can relax. This relaxation is an important part of the human process, and if they don't find it through storytelling, humans are going to find it somewhere. Especially now in the world that is so filled with entertainment, it's important to make sure that our entertainment is good for the planet. And by good for the planet, I also mean good for the people. A great tip for this is to think on the emotion. The emotional response that you want to convey in your story is massively important. And without this emotional response, you have no genre, you have no theme, you have no characters, you have nothing. Because everything is to serve this purpose, the emotional response that they get from your core truth. So there you have it, every reason I could possibly think of why storytelling is still important today and why you should be looking at how you can tell stories in your work. It could be anything, it doesn't have to be creative, but storytelling really allows you to connect to people in a way that you wouldn't have realized beforehand. If you enjoyed yourself while you were here and maybe you learned something along the way, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. But tell me about your story in the comments. What are you working on right now? Leave a link. I want to talk about it. And if you have any questions about storytelling, I want to do a Q&A video soon. So please leave them in the comments, and the first people to comment are going to be the people that get featured in the video. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you had a good time here. Goodbye.